I would be willing to bet that most of us have rarely, if ever, considered the close relationship between Jews and farm animals. So let's take this opportunity. Livestock is a big part of our Jewish holiday and ritual observance. In fact, were it not for the undeniable ability that we seem to have to attract various animals to us, our people might not have made it this far. We'll be reminded of that in just a few days when we read about the ram that Abraham sacrificed in place of his son Isaac. If he hadn't been so drawn to Abraham, we would have had no future as a people. We also have this delightful story, if you recall, of the talking donkey, not in Shrek, but in Numbers. This donkey talks to his master and ends up saving the Jewish people from an evil curse. But that's not even all. We Reformed Jews are a little squeamish about sacrifice. It's true, and I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of. We're not altogether proud of our history of slicing and dicing these farm animals to make expiation for our sin or to say thank you for a good harvest. And that's even more emphasized if I tell you that this week's Torah portion is called Atem Nitzavim, the stance of our people at the edge of the promised land and the great instructions that were given by Moses. This is what we Reformed Jews read on Yom Kippur. We'll hear it again, not just tomorrow, but in a few days from now. What's interesting, though, is that even though we hear this parasha this week and read it, Kenner Kaplan will read it, as I said, in 3 weeks on Yom Kippur, actually Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is talked about in the Torah. But our movement has made a decision not to read about it on that day. Why? The answer is because of these farm animals. The description of Yom Kippur and the common practices about it are located in the book of Leviticus, which is not what we read. It tells in great detail of the ritual of the Day of Atonement. The high priest had a lot to do that day, but his biggest job was to tend the goats. There were 2 goats involved in a ritual. The first one was sacrificed, as most farm animals who come into contact with us were at that time. And the second was not sacrificed. Rather, all of the sins of the people were placed upon this second goat, and then it was sent out into the wilderness, never to be heard from again, carrying away with it all of our sins. It sounds a lot like a scapegoat. And in fact, this is the source for the expression scapegoat. The term was coined in the 16th century by the first prominent English Bible translator, William Tyndale. And the idea of a person, or in this case an animal, being the bearer of our people's sins and misfortunes, unfortunately, comes directly from our Torah. So while the association between Jews and these farm animals throughout history may be a little-known fact, it is unfortunately not a little-known fact that there was an association, and has been since this time, between the Jews and a scapegoat. As we look back on our history, we're sure to see many, many times that our people has been the scapegoat of another people. How terribly, tragically ironic it is that the very mechanism through which we cleansed ourselves of sins and tried to become better people inside the story of the Torah became the symbol and the vehicle through which others have perpetrated the most heinous of crimes and sins against us. But actually, we all create scapegoats, I believe, out of one thing or another. It seems to be human nature. And that is the way we in the modern world use the word scapegoat. And it's indicative of a real misunderstanding that all of us have of the original purpose of that goat in Leviticus 16. If we think about how we create scapegoats, sometimes we scapegoat a problem, like it sounds like what the Nazis did in the 1930s. They are the problem in our society. They are responsible for our unhappiness, our failures, or our losses. It is their fault. And we do it every day. This person is the reason that I don't like my job, or I'm just so overworked that I don't have energy to give my loved ones, or When I was a kid, we didn't do things like that. It's the times we live in and not the child. The tragedy of this line of thought that's so common is that when we make a scapegoat out of a problem, making a specific external entity the source of our unhappiness, we avoid learning anything about ourselves. We've given ourselves license to complain about a problem and license to do nothing to change it. And as our experiences as Jews have shown us, we might be tempted to treat our designated scapegoat much more harshly than it deserves to be treated because we have loaded all of our blame upon it. We also create scapegoats by scapegoating something more positive, like a solution. A scapegoated solution is what we often hear in the political arena. Passing this or that bill will be the answer to our crisis, or this or that tax cut will bring the economy back to life. And the reason that both political parties tend to use scapegoated solutions is because it makes the problems that we face sound easy to solve. And it's not just politicians. We, of course, do this too. As soon as I finish this big project, I'll have more time to devote to you, we might say. Or, when I lose that weight, I'll be happy. These sentences fly out of our mouths all the time, and they seem as though they would be incentives for accomplishing whatever it is. But more often than not, our scapegoated solutions remain elusive because having so much riding on a certain choice or a certain achievement or a certain purchase or a certain change can cause us to pressure ourselves out of being able to get there. Our scapegoated solutions cloud our vision of our own wants and needs and capabilities. So scapegoating, as we've interpreted it, allows us to avoid system overhaul. It keeps us from seeing real problems and solutions, those based on our choices and our needs. But we Jews, as I just mentioned, created the scapegoat. Surely there must be something to it in the Torah beyond the excuses and the easy answers. And this is what it says in this passage. When Aaron has finished purging the shrine, cleaning the tent of meeting and the altar, the live goat, the one that was not sacrificed, shall be brought forward. Aaron shall lay both his hands upon the head of the live goat and confess over it all the iniquities and transgressions of the Israelites, whatever their sins, putting them on the head of the goat. And it shall be sent off into the wilderness through to a designated man. And the goat shall carry with it all their iniquities to an inaccessible region, and the goat shall be set free into the wilderness. If we break this ritual apart that's described in Leviticus, there are lots of familiar elements to us. There's the cleansing prayers and the renewal of worship spaces, all of which we're in the midst of right now. And then there's the physical contact with the goat. And finally, all the sins of the entire people are actually vocalized and upon this goat in a public ceremony. After the destruction of the temple, we stopped using farm animals in expiation for our sins. But this ceremony that's described here still exists in a way. We adapt our past traditions to fit modern sensibilities, so we no longer sacrifice animals. But what's taken the place of this very physical embodiment and our feelings and our souls that are bared upon this goat? What's taken the place of cleansing the temple and declaring our sins upon the goat and sending the goat from our midst once we've done all we could do with it? The answer is this season we're in right now. The season that begins tomorrow night with Slichot at 10 p.m. and culminates with Yom Kippur is the modern manifestation of the biblical goat. Tomorrow night we'll change the Torah covers to white, reflecting on a year and prepare to make amends and finally hear our first Tekiah Gedola. On Yom Kippur, instead of cleansing the tent of meeting, we say the cleansing prayers of Kol Nidre and Vidui. We physically feel atonement, not through feeling our hands on the goat, but rather feeling that hunger that gnaws at us all day long. Instead of declaring our sins and iniquities before the goat, we declare them before the ark and before one another, declaring our sins upon not the goat, but upon Yom Kippur. If we truly make an effort to understand our biblical text, we'll see that the declaration of sins upon this goat was a momentous occasion, a singularly important cleansing activity for the Israelites. And they were owning up to their sins and simply using the goat as a vehicle for doing so, a focal point. So I hope and pray that we are able to do the same on our modern season and day of Yom Kippur. I pray that this season, beginning tomorrow night, be a time when we begin to send our modern scapegoats, our simplified problems, and our made-up solutions away to the wilderness, to an inaccessible place. May we instead learn to use our biblical scapegoat, our ritualized days of atonement, to face our complex problems and our realistic solutions to them. And finally, when we see this reinterpreted biblical scapegoat, this Yom Kippur, ascending into the distance as it does when the gates close to an inaccessible place, may we remember, as did our ancestors, the sins we declared upon it. And let us vow that our biblical scapegoat of Yom Kippur aid us in ridding ourselves of simplified answers, of excuses, of scapegoats. Keni Hiratzon.